bringing their bullion to the mint, converting it into coin of the realm, then at zero seigniorage, or very close to zero seigniorage, then the ask and bid price would close and would approximate zero. And when it did, it meant that the market was saturated with gold coins. So anything above that saturation level would start circulating. But as long as there is a positive spread between the ask and bid price, it's not going to circulate. And for a very good reason too, because people will accept in extreme case of emergency, will not part with their gold coins, because they will reason that I will never be able to get this gold coin back on the same terms as I spent it. So, while sure, if it's a life-saving medicine they have to buy, they would sacrifice the gold coin, but they would not spend it on luxury items or cars or this or that or that. So these gold coins will not get into circulation until the spread disappears. And that's the fundamental mistake these Muslim countries, because Malaysia is Malaysia a Muslim country? Yeah. There are other Muslim countries, and it's amazing they haven't come hit on the idea that they have to open their mint to gold. Now suppose in Mecca they open to gold, what would happen? A fantastic change in the whole picture, monetary picture would take place. But they are just following or imitating the West. The West excluded this idea of opening the mint, so they just follow it. They never think of it that they could actually take the upper hand by taking the initiative. The Muslim countries opening the mint to gold. So there it is. That's a simple. And again, they don't have to have a huge stockpile of gold in the hands of the government and the central bank. It's all a matter of opening the mint and let the people bring their gold and bring their silver, and the government finds a way to pay for the cost of minting, which is, there is a cost. But they never consider the advantages the country would have, because all the gold from abroad will start flowing to them. It's amazing that the Muslim countries haven't thought about that. Iran or Turkey or just any Muslim country with any kind of resources, they would rather take up slogans like jihad and holy war, suicide bombers and suicide squads and all that, rather than having such a simple idea: open your mint to gold. And then you're on top of the world. No. As if the United States brainwashed them at a great cost so that they will not do the right thing from their own point of view. I can't explain this.
Shouldn't surprise everyone that there's sort of a lot of ignorance out there. But I think that's the last question. Time for lunch. So thanks very much to the professor.
5 more lectures. Of those 5, I believe we have Professor Fekete for 4, and we'll have Sandy Gently on Friday morning, right? So you can sleep in on Thursday night. No, I'm just kidding.
No, please do.
You will enjoy that very much as well. So I'm just buying time right now. Do you have any questions or a joke?
Ask for bids.
Because you asked for a joke, I can't think of one. it's that way, isn't it? But if you have any comments or so far questions related to the week, how it's going, and
Regular day-to-day work, you do money management for people, if I understand correctly?
I'm an advisor, yes.
I'm making it a point to ask most of the people in the room who have made name or reputation for themselves, so I'll ask you in front of everyone. If I'm so smart, why aren't I rich?
Well, it depends what you mean by rich.
How come I only have as much money as I have now instead of more?
Well, having more money doesn't make you rich.
If I'm so smart, how come I'm not financially rich?
I know what you're trying to say. You have to be on the inside to a great extent to be very wealthy or very rich. And you have to play the game. But it doesn't mean that you can't be rich through hard work and good entrepreneurial skills, whatever your field is. But through means of investing money, that's a different ballpark altogether. More and more so, because there is so much intervention by the authorities in the markets. I say to my clients that I do a lot of fundamental analysis. I'm a chartered financial analyst. So I look at balance sheets and adjust the numbers to make them more truthful, because firms are very good at making the picture look as good as possible. And you can do technical analysis, charts, and that's useful as well. But now you need to do interventional analysis as well. And I haven't been educated in that. And I think if you're on the inside, then you're much better at doing that. So that's the challenge. But that's why, as an advisor, I try to encourage my clients to take some money off the table and put it in bullion. But that's just money. It's not an investment. It's to be redeployed later on and to be invested when the time comes when it's recognized for its value. Enough about that. Yeah. Naughty. We have. So does it work now? Hello? Yes. What's your name? No, that's not one. Is it? It's very set. Oh, it works when it's red. Hello? Very annoying. This must be funded by the government.
Maybe we're being tight.
Maybe.
It's looking at their office.
He's going to ask me another question if it doesn't work. Professor, we are ready.
Do you want to know which does it too?
I think it should go around. It bothers me.
What does it? Put it in your pocket.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I introduced my first talk this morning telling you that there was a change in the menu. Two different topics were on the original program. We removed them to make room for something which is more topical. And in any case, those two things are available on the internet. One was the fiat currency as destroyer of labor, and the other fiat currency as the destroyer of capital. These are two essays which you find on the internet, for example, on my website. So feel free to unload it. And basically, I would present it very much the same way as you find it there. So we wanted to make room for two topical developments, very recent ones. And one of them I discussed in the morning lecture. This was the Zurich announcement about gold might just play a role in our monetary system, which is doomed to disappear in a very short order. I wouldn't give too much of a chance that it will survive another decade. I think it will have to go. It's beyond saving. So this is the last straw they grab, trying to save the system. Pull out gold, which was taboo up to now. It was a four-letter word, forbidden in polite company and polite university courses. And now all of a sudden, somebody who's high up in the US Treasury until he was kicked upstairs to the World Bank, is coming out that gold, after all, may have some role to play. Now, it won't be a gold standard, he was hastening to add, but it will be a good device to get a feel of the state of the market or get a bit of feedback. So there are some useful signals which you might collect from the gold market, meaning the paper gold market, never the physical gold market, because that's still a taboo, still a four-letter word. Physical gold is a four-letter word. Paper gold is no longer a four-letter word. It may be even going to play an important role. So I was informing you about this development, and at the other end of the spectrum, a very important paper by Antal Fekete, and the title of the paper was up, Cross of Gold, which I found a very good paper, and I think you should all read it. It's available on the website of Got Up. That's where I got it from. Probably it's available elsewhere too. And may I ask you, you were there at this meeting of CMRE in October 27. I understand this was a shortened, abbreviated version which was put on the internet. What was presented? After all, in an hour speech, he couldn't have said very much more than in what is
No, actually, his speech was an abridged version of what's available on the website. He only had about 20 minutes to speak, and he spoke very quickly, but he read directly from his paper.
So that on the internet is the full version. There's a full version. So that's very good, and I recommend it again. And you will hear more about this. I'm planning to write a rejoinder, basically very, very positive about Vieira's paper, with the title Cross of Gold contra crown of paper. They are both with reference to Williams Jennings Bryan, presidential candidate in the U.S. Presidential election of, I think, 1896, I think. And he was going all out against the gold standard. He was an advocate of silver, and these phrases, cost of gold, the idea is that labor has been burdened because they put the cost of gold on the back of labor. And the crown of thorns was pushed down on the brows of labor, he said. And he was fighting this, and so this was the slogan of the day. And I think we can turn the tables around and say that there is this fight. The cost of gold or the crown of paper is going to prevail. This is a lawsuit. These are the two parties, and who is going to win. So anyhow, I am planning this. I don't know how soon I will get around to complete this, but if you keep an eye on my website, sooner or later I think you will see. Basically, I'm very, very supportive of Vieira's ideas, but it needs an amendment or reinforcement. I tell you what the problem is. The problem is that when this breakdown of the monetary system is going to happen, as Vieira is predicting, and I'm predicting, and a lot of other very respectable observers are predicting, there will be a big, big problem, which is that there will be very, very little gold available. Gold is going into hiding, and this is at an accelerating rate. So when the collapse comes, the COMEX is going to collapse. The clearinghouse of COMEX is going to collapse. Gold will not be available at any price for paper money. So the only way you can get gold will be through barter. And that's going to be a big problem. So how is Vieira going to have his gold standard, which assumes that we can put the gold into the hand of every laborer, wage earner, because that's the ideal gold standard Vieira is talking about. And that needs gold. That takes gold, a lot of it. And where is this gold going to come from? So in my first talk this morning, I indicated my vision, how this, and this is what I would like to put in a more polished form, final form, and including that rejoinder. What I think is that it doesn't really matter how little gold is available at that time. Because if you combine the idea of a Vieira type of gold standard with the idea of real bill circulation, and when I say real bill, I always add the name Adam Smith, because he was the one who first described how these real bills actually operated, and they could finance. And Adam Smith had a magnificent, what's the word? When you are describing something in terms of
Analogy? An analogy?
Analogy, yeah, that's good, thank you. this is what Adam Smith says. Real bills are like a highway in the sky. And he immediately attaches an apology for this violent, another word is metaphor. Now, the word comes to my mind. Adam Smith says, please forgive me for this violent metaphor of talking about the highway in the sky. Now, he says this is a wonderful thing to have because it frees up, makes it available, land on the ground, which is taken up by our highways. And so the land is taken out of production, where we could produce agricultural goods or forests or what have you. And since we need these highways, it takes up a lot of land at the expense of expanding production. So this is, in his words, a violent metaphor because we could have the skyway, the highway in the skies to free up land for production purposes. This is the metaphor he's using because he says that gold is like productive land. So if we use gold for actual physical exchanges, changing hands, then this is taking land out of production to make room for the highways. But if we could put the highway up in the sky, that would be marvelous, because a cheaper medium could substitute for gold, and gold could be put back into production in the sense that it could be used as capital, savings, what have you. Now, today I don't think we have any need to apologize for a violent metaphor like this, because we do have lots of highways in the skies. Our jet airliners, cargo planes, crisscrossing the sky, something which Adam Smith could not think of. Well, he could, but he would think it's unreal to speak like that, and today is no more miracle involved in that. So the metaphor is no longer violent, but it's still very valid, and the idea is that there is physically not enough gold available to finance the production and distribution of the myriads of goods which society needs for its survival and to progress further. Just think of the extremely complex production processes to produce a computer or an airliner or any of the miracles which we have, what 100 years ago were quite unthinkable, let alone the time of Adam Smith. Now, just imagine how many exchanges have to take place to produce an airliner. There is a very nice paper by, I think, Leonard Reed. The title is I the Pencil. I the Pencil. The pencil writes an autobiography, how he came into being. This very not a mechanical pencil like this, but an ordinary wooden pencil. Going back to the rainforests where they harvested the wood and the the mines where the original coal or whatever the material came from, where it made the graphite, but it has to go through several processes. So actually, as the autobiography of the pencil turns out, it's an extremely complex process to produce something as simple as a pencil. So why the pencil? You have to read that. It's a very nice little piece. I think we should put it on the internet somewhere where everybody can read it. And so that's a very, very simple product, pencil. So take now, at the other extreme, a much more complicated product like a commercial jetliner, airplane, or a rocket, or a computer, anything. Now, how many exchanges have to take place in order to produce a pencil? And the high multiple of that would be the number of exchanges which have to take place in order to produce an airplane, modern jet liner. Why do I say this? Because in Adam Smith's vision, if you insist that all those exchanges have to be cash settled in gold, as some people today do, they talk about 100% gold standard. Nothing less will satisfy them. But this is a complete fantasy to think that those myriads of exchanges would be nice actually to exchange, to calculate how many exchanges are needed to produce a modern jet liner. It would be a fantastic amount. And if you want to gold settle every one of those exchanges, it's pretty obvious that it's physically not possible. So Adam Smith says that there is no need for that, because there is something as the second best thing. The first best thing to finance trade, commerce, production, distribution, and so on is gold. We have to agree. There is no point. But since it's physically not possible to finance all these exchanges, which even a simple pencil, very modest problem, have to be produced, since there is no way to do that, we have to ask the second best. And the second best is the real bill. Highway in the sky, Adam Smith says. Sorry, ladies and gentlemen, for the violent metaphor. But in order to understand what the problem is and what the solution is, we just have to have recourse to such violent metaphors. No longer violent, we accept it as a fact of life, that we have actually put so much traffic out to the sky. And further possibilities are that we'll even go to outer space. And in fact, a lot of telecommunication goes to these satellites. The beam is bounced back. So we do very much take advantage of the second best thing. Of course, the first best thing is real contact between people. We talk face to face and argue back and forth. But we don't have to be physical, geographically in the same place. We can be separated by oceans, and we still have instant communication. So you see, this is what the vision of Adam Smith, which is a wonderful vision, still valid. Now, mind you, Adam Smith, like all human beings, did make errors. He was wrong in his theory of value, which was a very serious mistake, because Karl Marx swallowed it. What's the word?
Hook, line, and sinker.
Hook, line, and sinker. He swallowed it without thinking about it. And he created the labor theory of value, which has a vague relationship to Adam Smith's original idea. And it cost, somebody estimated, 160 million lives, because it was put into effect in the Soviet Union, it was put into effect in China, which is still around, although no longer using the mass killing methods. It was put into effect in Cambodia and in other countries, and that's the price we had to pay because somebody made a bad idea popular, which in this case is Adam Smith. So I'm not uncritical, but at the same time I must observe that the Ludwig von Mises Institute pretty well disowned Adam Smith, which I think was a mistake, because Adam Smith had some good ideas. One of them was his idea of describing the real bill, the evolution of the real bill, and how it can do an extremely useful job as the second best thing to the gold coin itself. So whenever something has to be produced, at the same time when the maturing product arises, real bills arise as well, and they finance the production and distribution process, but not longer than 90 days, which is the length of the season of a year. And then the consumer goods is removed from the market by the ultimate consumer who consumes it, so the consumption good disappears. At the same time, the paper which financed its production distribution also disappears. The real bill expires, disappears. So there's no inflation involved in any imaginable sense of the word, because the money created for the purpose of producing the good will disappear simultaneously with the consumption of the good. So the available consumption goods and the money financing their production distribution change together. And if society, if the people, the consumers call for more, then this is possible. It's not rigid. If everything had to be gold financed, there would be a limit to the demands of the consumers. Because if they want more, there's no way to finance the production and distribution of more. Because the output of the gold mines cannot be increased overnight. But if the consumer really wants those goods, then there is a way. And the way is to issue gold maturing real bills against this new product. As an extreme example, I usually mention an imaginary drug, medication, which can cure cancer. But as you probably know, when insulin was invented in the 1920s, the supply of insulin was very, very limited. So limited, in fact, that there was a handful of patients who these are diabetic patients, who could be supplied with sufficient insulin. And of course, society wanted this very badly because this was still at the testing stage. These insulin injections had to be tested on real patients. They had done the animal testing earlier, but now it was already at the level of clinical testing, and the results were coming in. But the supply of insulin was so limited that the number of people, patients who could be accommodated, was confined to a very short, very small list. So the whole situation reminded us of the play of George Bernard Shaw, the title "The Doctor's Dilemma." It wasn't specifically about insulin, but it could have been. A doctor invented treatment in the play of George Bernard Shaw, which could save lives. Certain illness could have been diabetes. But the doctor had a clinic with 10 beds only, and there was just no way to expand this because the medication he was using was on such a limited supply. And then the very interesting plot was, of course, that the doctor had to decide who is going to live and who is going to die, because he had 100 applicants and only 10 beds for the test round. So we had to pick and choose those 10 who will hopefully survive, and the 90 were condemned to death. So the doctor was playing God in picking and rejecting applicants. George Bernard Shaw dubbed this play, he classified his plays pleasant and plays unpleasant. And of course this one particular play, The Doctor's Dilemma, was a very, very unpleasant play because of this dilemma. Who is going to live, who is going to die? Playing God is the problem. Now, of course, this is not a lecture about literature or George Bernard Shaw, but I think it's very relevant because we have this problem that the consumer wants this new drug which can cure cancer, but the supply is limited. So let's change this a little bit and say that actually if there was gold available, then the supply could be increased substantially to satisfy or approximate the supply, would approximate the demand. If gold was available, but gold is not available, so should we give up and say, well, no, we have to play God, or the doctor has to play God, reject so many applicants, we'll have to die. And the wonderful thing, the wonderful news, which goes back to Adam Smith, is that gold does not have to be present physically. If the consumer wanted that miracle drug badly enough, then the consumer will pay gold for the product when it comes to the market. And as soon as the evidence is there that the consumer is going to pay the gold coin, then the real bills will come and crop up and start financing, oiling the machinery of production, oiling commerce, oiling distribution, retail, wholesale, everything, and the product will become a reality. This is the message from Adam Smith. So, going back to my original story, Edwin Vieira ignores the problem that there is not going to be gold in sufficient quantity when this collapse will happen, as it will. So does that invalidate the plan or the vision which Edwin Vieira has for the return of the real gold standard when everybody will have access to gold? The answer is not necessarily. If we allow real bills to play the role as Adam Smith explained. Now, Adam Smith didn't invent real bills. Real bills arose spontaneously in the 12th, 13th century in the Italian city-states, which were trading. They were usually port cities where cargo ships arrived from all parts of the known world, because not the whole world was known at that time. And while these goods, merchandise, was in transit in the bottoms of these ships, the real bills were already in circulation in these Italian city-states, and when the goods arrived in port, then the real bills became payable in gold, and there was no question about default because the goods were already on the dock, ready for sale, distribution and sale, and the consumer eagerly awaited these goods and pay gold, so the real bills could be paid as contracted, 90-day maturity. Now, we are facing a very similar problem here. There is very little gold, as in the 12th and 13th century there was very little gold, not because physically gold didn't exist above ground. It did, but went into hiding because of the conquest of the western part of the Roman Empire and collapse of law and order breaking down, and collapse of legal system, no security. Everybody had to defend himself. So that's how the feudal system was born, that only a few feudal lords could give you the protection, the security, so you have to pay allegiance to that feudal lord, even indentured yourself for the protection which the lord, the feudal lord, would give you. Otherwise you were exposed to it. No legal system existed which would protect you against bandits and assassins, assassination, this and that. So the problem was how gold will get back into circulation, which is really going back to civilization. From an uncivilized world, which the feudal world was pretty well uncivilized in the sense that unless you indentured yourself to a feudal lord, you were unprotected and everybody could prey on you. So it was in the interest of everybody And of course, this is how the feudal structure was formed, and some of them were at the bottom of the pile, and these were the serfs. They were hardly better than slaves in an earlier age. The serfs had practically no rights. Well, we don't have to worry about the legal hair splitting. What's the difference between a serf and a slave? But the difference was really minor. I mean, you could kill your slave if you wanted to punish him, and the law allowed you to do that in ancient Rome or some other slave keeping society. Now, I guess the serfs did have some protection against such arbitrary punishment, but not all that much. Anyhow, that's not what I'm discussing here. I'm discussing the problem of coaxing gold out of hiding. And this is a problem that Vierre did not consider. And I think this is missing from his very bright vision of the future. Because if you cannot coax out gold out of hiding, then your vision may not be worth all that much. Because it all depends on the availability. You want to put gold coins in the hands of every wage earner. But there has to be sufficient gold around. So, here's the answer. What you do is start with however little gold you have. And the consumer will tell you what is that type of merchandise which he or she demands most urgently. And that one will be financed with real bills. But the real bill will have to mature into the gold coin in 90 days. But that's good enough for a start, because it's good enough to have enough for survival. And then, as law and order returns, it would be faster if the governments open their mint to gold, but it will be slower if they don't, and we don't know what governments will do. Of course, when they are frightened, governments will do anything to save their power. So it could be that actually they will open their mint, the government mint to gold. And if they do, that's a good thing. That will hasten the process of going back to normalcy. But even if they don't, we are not completely lost, because we can start with the very, very little gold which is available and make it through this highway in the sky, through real bills circulation, make gold do the job of a much bigger supply, which is not yet available, but we can do something about it. We can finance it. And I also explained in the first lecture this morning that the fact that very, very little gold is available doesn't have to mean sky-high prices, as the quantity theory of money would predict, which theory I consider completely false, except in a very few unimportant cases. Because the burden is not going to fall on the price structure. The scarcity of gold is not going to make prices go sky high, because the burden of adjustment will fall on a different mechanism under discount rate. Now, I cannot enter this because subject is limited and this would lead too far afield, but you just have to take my word for it. I've written about this, lots of articles on the internet, and I'm going to write a lot more about this, which is the discount rate, very different, fundamentally different from the rate of interest. In fact, they, in many ways, are opposite to one another. Interest rate reflects savings, and discount rate represents consumption, propensity to save, propensity to consume, and the discount rate would be the reciprocal of the propensity to consume. Interest rate reciprocal of the propensity to consume. But this is not my topic here. You have to accept my word on faith that the danger of sky-high prices is not a real danger, because the adjustment falls on the mechanism of the discount rate, which is very flexible and it can absorb the shock. Whether it's a supply shock or it's a demand shock, the discount rate can take it and protect the price level against volatile changes and instability. So if you accept this, then the problem gets simplified. We can make a start. Now, I started out this afternoon by telling you about new developments which happened very recently. So I haven't said anything about it yet. I'm going to say it now. Years ago, I was involved in a debate, public debate, which went on the internet. I have been personally attacked, quite viciously. I've been called names and unpleasant references. I was an inflationist, and this and that. In particular, the Ludwig von Mises Institute opened its forums to these attacks on me, but did not give me a chance. I asked for a chance. I know Lou Rockwell, who's the president of the Ludwig von Mises Institute. We worked together in Washington, D.C. He worked for Ron Paul, and I worked for another congressman from California on the staff of this congressman. And we met occasionally, and we were always in a very friendly, certainly respectful. We respected each other. There was no problem. Now, Lou Rockwell opened his forums. He has several of them, including the Lou Rockwell letter or something. And there are other. Ludwig von Mises Institute has a website and so on. And one guy by the name Blumen, I forget his first name. Robert Blumen. I think he lives in Switzerland, is that correct? But doesn't matter. He was one of the most vicious opponents who criticized the Real-Bills doctrine, but he made it very personal, attacking against me. Would never mention the name of Adam Smith, because they were not sure whether Adam Smith is a free target to attack, but it was convenient to attack him. Relatively unknown professor from Newfoundland, and take out all the and ridicule the Real-Bills doctrine. Now this debate went on for about a year, It was several years ago, might be as many as 8 years ago. And it was fairly well publicized and followed and commented on. And then it died down. And I felt comfortable about this. Oh yeah, Lou Rockwell refused to publish my rejoinder, answering the charges and making a case for the real goods doctrine, which is a very strange procedure, because if you give space for an attack, whoever was attacked would like to answer this, that it's normal procedure to allow equal time. But to shut off any possible... Actually, I got a personal letter from Lou Rockwell which said that you don't have any problem in putting your pieces on the internet, so just... we are not going to publish it. It's a very strange procedure. After all, if I am attacked on this website, I should be given the possibility to answer on that website and not another one, because the readership of this could be quite different from the readership of the other. But I'm just mentioning this. That's how I was treated by Lou Rockwell. And I felt bad about it, because my memory was that we always had a very pleasant relationship. Anyhow, the debate died down. I felt comfortable about it because I have been supported by several others who came out and were ready to supply more material in the argument my side, and it gave me publicity which I could put to good use, and so I was comfortable with this. And then nothing happened for years, and it just so happened about a month ago that Blumen dug out the hatchet and stepped on the war path again for no special reason, and he started attacking me once more. This just happened about a month ago, I think, right? Was it you who sent me the...
Either me or Rudy.
I answered it.
Oh, you...
Rudy answered it.
Oh, yeah.
I answered Gary North as well, because he wrote a similar article,
Yeah.
and neither of them bothered with this. And these are all on the Boston Institute website.
And then a second thing happened, and that was an interview on the Daily Bell, which is a very good website I would recommend to all of you if you are not already familiar with it, called Daily Bell. And the Daily Bell every Sunday has an interview with somebody of standing in economics, monetary science, and on a particular Sunday, not very long ago, it was in October, I guess, they interviewed, the Daily Bell interviewed Lawrence White, professor of economics at George Mason University. Well, it doesn't matter. I'm not sure. And I know Larry, and he is a gentleman, which I cannot say of all the authors on the Lou Rockwell website. But Larry is a gentleman. However, he was extremely critical of the real goods doctrine. He didn't mention me by name, but I just felt that I want to answer this. And I also published a rejoinder on the Daily Bell. And it appeared on the Daily Bell, and I also put it on other websites. And this started, together with the Blumen broadside, started a new debate on the issue. And now I'm being told, see, I haven't been able to follow the internet for the past week because we are busy with the symposium, but I'm told by various people that it flared up, really. It created a very large interest now because of the problem of the great financial crisis we have. And in particular this problem which Vieira has, how will, after a monetary collapse, how will life start again? I wrote several articles. One of them I gave the title, "Is There Life After Sudden Death?" And the implication is that the monetary system will collapse. And this will be very, very unexpected to most people. I'm sure everybody here is well prepared to face that eventuality. But if you take society at large, then you must see that this will be a sudden death syndrome because people are not prepared for that. So once this sudden death occurs, how will life start? Because obviously this is not going to be the end of civilization. People are not going to commit mass suicide at the altar of fiat money. They are not going to be sacrificial lambs on the altar of paper money, and they want to survive, and they will find a way, as they always did in the most extreme situations so far. And so how will this happen? And certainly 100% gold standard is not the solution, because gold will simply not be available. Gold goes into hiding, and people who control gold are not going to trust just somebody who says, I'm a politician, I want you to vote for me and I will solve that. This is not going to be as simple as the previous elections. So society has to face the situation that a very, very limited supply of gold is available, and then start life. Now, one of the things Robert Blumen said in this broadside, criticizing me, is that it's nonsense to say that we have to start from zero because all the factories will still be there, all the machinery will still be there, his house will still be there, and it's only the monetary system which collapsed, and it's easy to set it right because we just declare 100% gold standard, and all the banks using fractional reserves will be chased out. Well, I agree, the banks can be chased out, but the problem which Blumen never addressed was, why do real bills actually circulate? Because it's foolish to suggest that any paper, just put a stamp on it, will start circulating spontaneously. No. There were accommodation bills which refused to circulate. There were anticipation bills which refused to circulate. Even treasury bills could refuse to circulate. if the government is known to be bankrupt. Now, the United States government is not known to be bankrupt as yet. Some of us know that it's beyond saving, but this has not gone over into the general consciousness. The United States is considered as a solvent government. So treasury bills still circulate.
And of, not money sponsorship, but tremendous sponsorship from Julian Darby, who's a part-time lecturer here in the MBA program in economics, to make it possible for us to use these wonderful facilities. Julian, I know you want to leave. You're very busy.
Excuse me.
How can I raise this? What's the process? So that it's not in our way anymore. Yeah. Fantastic. I think I know how.
Excuse me, Louis, you mentioned Senegal, New Zealand, and one other one which I didn't quite catch. What was that?
BMG, Bullion Management Group. You go bmgbullion.com. You will have their website. My firm's associated with that. Right, so before we start today's lecture, the professor has asked me to convey to, in particular, the students who are here, to recognize that the support comes from a benefactor in Switzerland. His name is Anthony Weil. He is the founder of the Daily Bell, and he is sponsoring you to attend this conference. So it would be appreciated.
One of the sponsors, because
Yeah.
the others are also involved.
So a thank you note from you to him would be much appreciated, and I will give you the details later on. And his organization, the Daily Bell, I happen to really enjoy visiting and reading the interviews.
May I just add that Anthony Weil is on the lookout for young talent. He realizes that the present guard is getting old, and very soon we'll have to pass the torch on to the younger generation. So a thank you note is a very good investment, because he will keep an eye on, first of all, he will presumably sponsor further symposia and courses and so on, which we are going to offer. But beyond that, we definitely want to recruit young people. And I might as well mention Rudolf Stark, the news that his thesis has been accepted.
Yes, the professor, of course, as you know, has founded the New Austrian School of Economics, and the first course was given in Budapest in August. The next course will be given in March in Hungary, but in Scotia. And one of the students that was sponsored to come to the course in August in Budapest was doing his thesis in economics, and his topic, we got an email last night confirming that it was accepted, which is a milestone, according to the professor.
Breaking the ice.
Because the topic touches on real things.
And the gold standard.
And the gold standard. So for the
Four
university,
letter words.
for a university in Vienna to accept that is remarkable. So it's very positive news. So without further ado, today's morning lecture is the fall and the rise of the gold standard.
In that order.
In that order, Professor. There is no lapel today. This device here replaces the other device, so just wonder.
Well, that's a smaller. Thank you very much, Louis. It's a happy day for several reasons. One is what Louis mentioned about the acceptance of the thesis title of Rudolf Stark. Is not here. The German universities run a different timetable from that in the southern hemisphere, and it's very difficult for a student to get away, especially such a great distance. So none of our previous students is here, but we have several of them, very bright young people. Rudolf Stark is one, and Ludwig
Karl Ludwig.
Ludwig Karl is another. So they are our star students so far, but we would like to recruit a lot more in the southern hemisphere, particularly in New Zealand. So that's, we got the news last night, and in order for you to appreciate the significance of that, you just have to remember that 2 years ago such a thesis title would have been rejected out of hand. Gold? Well, we are busy people here. We are doing real research. We can't have such a frivolous title. Gold. Real business? Where do you live? What do you think? What do you take our university for? That was the attitude only 2 years ago. And now they accepted the title as a big breakthrough. So, my topic, as we mentioned, is the fall and rise of the gold standard, but since we had to sacrifice the afternoon slot for a little play, impromptu play, which we are planning, it's still on, right? The topic for this afternoon originally was sound, less sound, least sound, the unhappy birthday of the euro. It's the 10th anniversary of the euro. So I will take a little time during this morning session to say a few words about the euro as well. But starting out with the fall and rise of the gold standard. I'd like to point out to you that the gold standard was not a fly-by-night monetary system. It was the monetary system which had a record of thousands of years. And during these thousands of years, it was doing a great job. It made all this economic, technological, financial progress possible. So if you think of such things as transcontinental shipping, transoceanic shipping, transcontinental railways, and then the whole development of aviation, civil aviation, passenger service, air service between continents, air cargo, and then the whole gamut of radio, television, and the computer development. These were fantastic things, but ultimately the financing of all this technological progress was due to the gold standard, which made the savings possible. I mean, you have to have a monetary system which encourages savings, because these are very capital-intensive activities when you develop something like a jet engine. And if you have a monetary system which discourages savings, such as the monetary system peddled by Keynes or Friedman and many others before and after them, then the capital needed for these developments, technological and otherwise, would not have been possible. And I haven't even mentioned therapeutical research, medical research, pharmaceutical research, contributed incredibly to the lengthening of the span of human lives. As a consequence, people who have gone through universities, it's a tremendous investment on the part of society to train these people, and if we can extend their lifespan a decade or more, then they will be able to contribute that much more of the talent which society invested in them by virtue of their university education. So if you add all this up, without the gold standard there would have been no savings making that development possible. You really have to see that very clearly. Now you might come to me and say, well, you are exaggerating, because take, for example, computers. After all, 25 years ago, computers were, especially PCs, were almost unheard of. And 25 years ago, there was definitely no gold standard. So we can still have all this development without the gold standard. Well, my answer would be, if you challenge me that way, my answer would be that the computer industry didn't start 25 years ago. It did start maybe hundreds of years before. After all, I would like to remind you of Gottfried Leibniz, who 300 years ago discovered what we today call the binary number system. And this is the number system with base 2 instead of base 10. So the binary number system needs only 2 digits, 0 and 1, instead of the 10 digits we use in the decimal number system. This number system was considered as a curiosity, as a toy for mathematicians to play with. Nobody thought at the time that it would ever come to very heavy use, which it did find in the 20th century when computers came to maturity. But actually, Leibniz himself did envision computers. Now, I'm not saying he invented this because he was very clear that that's the way to go for, but he actually constructed a mechanical device for addition and multiplication and subtraction and even division. And it was based on the binary number system. But the point I'm making is that if you really want to pin down the historical point when computers entered our civilization and started impacting that, started with Leibniz and the discovery of the binary number system. And well, true, for centuries it was a very subdued thing. Very little research was done, very few people were interested. But little by little, the idea came to maturity, and already in the 1930s, there was a group of people who were actively doing research in computing. So I mentioned the name of John von Neumann, another Hungarian who left Hungary in the 30s, came to the United States, became a professor at Princeton University, and very soon they built the first electronic computer. I think the name was ENIAC or something.
ENIAC.
That's neither here nor there. But the interesting thing is that there were no transistors in those days. But there were electronic tubes, right, which radios use. Is that the word tubes?
Valves.
Valves.
Vacuum tube.
Electronic valves. They had a filament which heated up the cathode, the name for the negative pole, and then the vacuum. These are vacuum tubes, and the anode, the positive, was another pole, and the electrons would leave the cathode in the vacuum and hit the anode. And then there were grids put between the two, and if you gave charge, electric charge, negative usually, then you could vary the flow of electrons. And this was fantastic. It could be used for amplification, it could be used for generating alternating current, very high frequency, and so fantastic device. Today completely replaced by the transistors. Now, the interesting thing is that I think the first electronic computer, which was built, I think, in Princeton, used 18,000 of those valves. 18,000. And it took up so much electric energy to run, which would supply a small village, the whole village, all the electric appliances, heating, lighting, electric ironing, and all that from a source, and the entire output of such a plant would be devoted to run that computer. 18,000 valves, and the energy input had to be high because each and every valve had a heating unit inside, because these electrons would jump off the cathode only if they are heated to a certain temperature. So actually, they also had to have a cooling system, because 18,000 electronic valves generate an awful lot of surplus heat, which would have interfered with the work. I just mentioned this because all this started in the 30s, and in the 30s, early 30s, there was still a gold standard, as you know. And even if there wasn't gold standard, but there had to be some capital which made the research possible. So that capital was already accumulated. After all, the radio was invented earlier, in the 20s, or even earlier. And the whole history of the industry having to do with electric power generation and so on was already in place, without which all this wouldn't have been possible. So what I'm saying is that this argument that computers came much after the gold standard was eliminated from the scene is not valid, because capital accumulation is a time-consuming process, and it may even take as long as 100 years to have the savings ready for an invention which perhaps will take place 50 years later. And let me give you an example. Perhaps you have heard the name of Hero. I think it was early in the Christian age, 180 or something like that, that Hero, Roman, invented something which today is called Heron's, what is it called? Heron's ball or something. It was a steam generating device which looked like a ball. You heated it with something, maybe a candle. And the steam, when the water inside boiled, the steam was let out, and it had a pipe, horizontal pipe with the two ends. There was a pivot point here, and the two ends of this horizontal pipe, one opened in this direction, the other opened in the other direction. And as the steam came out, it started rotating. And the same principle as a rocket. The rocket is burning, something that it propels. But this was stationary except for the turning of that horizontal pipe. And this, ladies and gentlemen, was the invention, believe it or not, of the steam turbine. Because if you think of it, the steam turbine uses exactly the same principle. It's different arrangement, but it's the same idea. So you might say that the steam turbine was invented shortly after the birth of Christ, within 100 years, something. But even the word steam turbine was not known for another 1800 years. And in fact, Heron's ball was a toy. That's all it was. The rich people bought it, and it was a conversation piece. Light the candle, wait a little, and the thing starts turning. Fantastic. But nobody, now, you might ask, how come? Can it be that nobody thought of putting it to some real use after all the hard labor it took to do work in the mines or on the surface or construction and so on? Could have been helped and made easier if you apply. And we don't even mention such a thing as the railway engine, which could also have been invented shortly after. Well, I cut the long story short. I just say to you, please remember that it's not human ingenuity which was in short supply. Because Heron's ball proves that the ingenuity was there. What was in short supply? Capital was in short supply. Because it's one thing to invent something brilliant and quite another to put it to use. Because in order to put a good idea to use, you've got to save, you've got to accumulate capital. And if the monetary system or the willingness of people to save and so on is not there, then Heron's ball will remain a conversation piece for more than 1,000 years, as it happened in this case. And that's just one example. Electricity wasn't invented in the 19th century. It was invented by the ancient Greeks. You know, and there are any number of other examples. In every one of them, if you look at them, you will find that what was missing, it was not human ingenuity, it was not the obtuseness of people to see the obvious that this could be a labor-saving device, but it was the lack of capital which has to be accumulated before you can make use of any idea, any good idea. And to do that, you need a proper monetary system. And that's what gold was. And that's what gold facilitated for thousands of years. And the argument is also true in the reverse. Namely, you cut off the gold standard at one point, and even ban gold, confiscate it, remove it. The consequences will not be immediately obvious. Why? Because of inertia. There is capital accumulated already. Now, destruction of the gold standard does not mean that you have destroyed the capital which has been accumulated over hundreds of years before. Because the capital is going to stay, and it is going to make things look as if not much happened. So gold is gone, okay. We are all right. We still have our houses, we still have our food, we still have our gadgets, the televisions, everything. But the capital accumulation, which is almost an invisible process, has been gravely injured. Now, capital is like a living thing, living organism. It has to be maintained. If you do not maintain capital, it's going to wither away. And getting eroded. There's an erosion. Not just wear and tear, but also obsolescence. And a lot of other factors are there to make capital disappear. So it's not an immediate process, destruction of capital from one day to the next. But if you cut off the gold standard, then you have gravely injured the process of capital maintenance, capital accumulation, all those things which are necessary to maintain human progress, which happened before. Do not take it for granted that the destruction of the gold standard will not have an effect on this. And it may take 50 years, may take 100 years, and then one sunny day you wake up and see that capital is gone, completely destroyed. Because, as I say, it's a time-consuming process to build it up, and it's a time-consuming process to fritter it away. So, our economists, our governments, our banks, central and otherwise, our economic journals, financial journals, and so on, are all guilty, very seriously guilty of simply not investigating the consequence. When the government of the United States announced to the world that we have liberated ourselves from the chains of gold, we are now starting a new millennium based on paper, government paper, government bonds, bills, notes. people who were slaves under the gold standard, they are now free. And it's only our imagination which limits future progress. This was just propaganda, and in fact it was propaganda. I think yesterday I mentioned this, to put a brave face on the default. The United States had obligations to pay gold, domestic and international. And the United States defaulted on the domestic obligations to pay gold in 1933 under a Democratic president, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, 1933. Days after his inauguration, he suspended the gold standard, the domestic gold standard. He went back to an international gold standard without domestic redeemability of gold, but internationally the dollar, did I say redeemability of gold? Redeemability of the dollar in gold domestically was still non-existent, but internationally in 1934 Roosevelt established gold standard, or re-established it, which was a very limited gold standard because only internationally was the dollar redeemable in gold at a new parity of 35. The original parity was more closer to $20 an ounce. The new one was 35, and it was confined to foreign governments and foreign central banks, financial institutions, which could take their claim, paper claim, of dollars and redeem it, have it redeemed in gold. So that was one default. And about 40 years later, in 1971 to be precise, another president, this time a Republican, Richard Nixon, defaulted on the international gold obligations of the United States, and thereby making the dollar the only basis for the international monetary system. Now, as I mentioned, governments, all the governments, banks, central and otherwise, financial journalists, economic profession, academia, financial journalists, financial writers, and so on, are all guilty because they did not investigate the consequences of these two decisions. They just accepted. Now, I don't believe for a moment that this was a spontaneous response. But obviously, there are forces behind the curtain acting. Could have been bribe, could have been blackmail, could have been arm twisting or something to silence anybody who was trying to be critical about. And pointing out these things, which I have pointed out in a few words, that capital accumulation and capital destruction are two time-consuming processes which are sometimes invisible, but they are absolutely necessary nevertheless for the health of society, of the national economy as well as the world economy. So these forces behind the scene, bribe, blackmail, and so on, arm twisting, came together and silenced any criticism of the destruction, of the deliberate destruction of the gold standard. And we are still suffering the consequences. to see the responsibility which is spread wide of society for the crisis we have now, which I suggest to you is a good crisis. It's not a subprime mortgage crisis. It's not a crisis of loose bank lending, or you can find any number of ad hoc explanations for it. It's a gold crisis which took its origin much earlier. In some cases, almost 100 years earlier. Because I want to be fair to the United States, and I want to point out to you the responsibility of other countries. And this is important, because as my title suggests, there was a fall and rise of the gold standard. We should talk about the rise a little later. But the fall was not just as simple as I explained, the two defaults, American defaults, 1933 and 1970. Because actually it did start 100 years ago. I already had an opportunity to talk about this, so I'm just refreshing your memory that in 1909, the French and the German governments introduced legal tender bank notes, and this was a coercion, forcing people, creditors, to accept paper under the penalty of law in settlement of debt. So the voluntarism was abolished thereby. And if you really think of it, that was the beginning of the fall of the gold standard. Because what this meant was that there was another ultimate extinguisher of debt in addition to gold. Gold has always performed and discharged its duty as the ultimate extinguisher of debt. And that was based on voluntary cooperation. But now, because of the government intervention, because of the legal tender laws, the banknotes of the central bank were forcibly imposed on the people, and they became, in a way, an ultimate extinguisher of debt. And again, academia, economists, financial journalists didn't ask any question. They took it as a natural development. That's in the cards, so we have a step forward. We have overcome superstition and all the rest. But actually, paper cannot be the ultimate discharger, extinguisher of debt. And for a very good reason, which goes back to, again, the very early Renaissance and the end of the Middle Ages in our Western civilization. And this was the invention of the double entry bookkeeping by Luca Pacioli, an Italian Renaissance, a fantastic discovery. I mean, it's really incredible that our schools do not mention this. It's one of the greatest discoveries of our civilization, on a par with the discovery of the wheel, which we can't even date it happened so long ago. But the discovery of double entry bookkeeping is fairly recent in comparison, because it was, do you know what year Luca Pacioli? Well, Luca Pacioli was a mathematics professor in Italy, and he, I think, taught during his career at 12 different universities. He was going from one place to another, and he ultimately wrote a textbook on mathematics, or arithmetic to be more precise. It was a textbook for his students who were taking courses in mathematics. And I think it was chapter 11 in that book, just one chapter in a bigger book on mathematics, was devoted to bookkeeping. And in that relatively short chapter, he announced the principle of double entry bookkeeping. The idea is rather simple. It is that books, for the purposes of bookkeeping, which every firm, or even private firms without partners or shareholders, should keep the books in two columns, assets and liabilities. And at the end of every single business day, they should make changes to bring it up to date, which meant changes in the assets and liabilities. But every single business day, when the books were squared, the balance should be zero between assets and liabilities. Today we don't see anything spectacular about this, but at the time it was earth-shaking. Why? Because it assumed that you had to create a new concept. And this new concept has different names, so it's still fuzzy in our thinking, because some people would call it capital, some people would call it net worth, some people would call it balance. In other words, usually, prior to Luca Pacioli, the balance was positive. In other words, the firm had to have a positive balance. With a negative balance, you wouldn't go very far. You would be eliminated from the economic universe. But the balance was positive, and what Luca Pacioli said was that this positive balance is actually a negative balance, because the firm owes it to the owners of the firm. Because we have to assume that it is a contingent liability, in the sense that if for any reason the firm has to be dissolved tomorrow, then this positive balance will have to go to somebody. And it's the partners or the shareholders or the single owner, whichever the case of the firm, which will, after liquidating the firm, will have that positive balance. So you see the very big leap of intellectual effort. There is a positive balance as it has to be. So call it negative because it belongs to somebody in the case that the firm has to be liquidated for any reason whatsoever. from positive to negative, but that didn't occur to anybody before. It didn't occur to Luca Pacioli, and that was principle in double keeping. And a very important part of that is that the balance after book squaring at the end of the day, or end of the week, or end of the month, or end of the year, the balance should be zero. Assets are equal to liabilities. And if it doesn't come out that way, then there's a mistake somewhere, and then you have to go back and add up the columns and check where the arithmetic mistake was made. Now, if I present it that way, you may have the impression that, after all, double entry bookkeeping is just a way to track down arithmetic mistakes. But that would be a very naive view. It's far more. I honestly don't find the words to impress you just how important this idea was. Why? Because without double entry bookkeeping, you wouldn't be able to have joint stock enterprises or any larger economic project. You wouldn't be able to undertake, because in order to pool the resources of different individuals and start a company or a bank or a financial institution, insurance company, anything which takes more than the savings of a family or a single person, no matter how clever, how rich this person may be, is very limited, very limited. In order to undertake large-scale projects, you need joint stock companies. So you will have to have shareholders who contribute their shares. Now this works well. I mean, it may work poorly under other circumstances, but it works well only if there is a way to calculate the value of individual shares in that enterprise on a daily basis. Because it's always in the back of your mind that the company may have to be liquidated on short notice. And that is possible only if there's a way to calculate the liability which the company has to its shareholders. If there's no way to calculate it, then you won't be able to entice the capital you need to start the project. Because people say, now this is taking risk and that's beyond my resources, or it's not compatible with my risk appetite, to use that fashionable word which they use today. I love that. I laugh at it because it's just so ridiculous, but really it captures the problem, doesn't it? In a pretty admirable way. So it was the invention of double entry bookkeeping which gave rise to the great economic development we started after, with the Renaissance and the New Age discovery of America, all kinds of engines, labor-saving devices, just name it. And without this joint stock company idea, enough capital would have never been accumulated. So these two things, the gold standard and the principle of double entry bookkeeping were the real causes of our economic development, of which we are all beneficiaries. I mean, we enjoy comforts and possibilities in our daily lives, which the most powerful kings or richest individuals, even 100 or 200 years ago couldn't have thought possible. I mean, you look everywhere, central heating, or entertainer, just name it. It's new. We benefit from it. And the most powerful kings and the richest people didn't have that. I didn't even dream about this. I mean, Adam Smith, he mentioned yesterday, thought that this is a violent metaphor to talk about highway in the sky. Today it's a common thing. We just take airplanes. How long did it take to come by boat from Europe to New Zealand? A week or I don't know.
6 weeks.
And now it's still a strenuous trip. Between 15 and 20 hours. But, I mean, where are we? In comparison with those people who were originally coming from Europe to settle in New Zealand or even North America. It's just incredible what the conveniences we enjoy and take for granted. It never occurs to us what made it possible. Two things, gold standard and the principle of double entry. But actually the two depend on one another, because if you don't have a sound unit of account, then the double entry bookkeeping is not going to take you very far. You need a sound accounting unit, and that's gold. And without gold, it will have to be a negative value, such as debt. And if you have debt, or you manufacture a unit of account out of debt, whether it's the government's debt or bank's debt or any debt, then you are on very slippery slopes. You may not immediately suffer the consequences, but it's certainly the road to hell. To start an accounting system and adopt, embrace negative value, let's say that, as a unit of account. And that's what we are suffering. So here we are. We have the governments in Europe introduced a negative unit, which was liability of the central bank in France and in Germany, and all other countries followed suit because they found this is a marvelous invention. You can manufacture wealth out of that by simply introducing the principle of legal tender banknotes and start printing them and spreading it all over. Wonderful idea. You can manufacture wealth out of thin air. Wonderful. But where were the thinkers? Where were the economists? Where were the accountants? Where were the actuaries? Where were the financial journalists to sit down and say, well, wait a minute, I just have to scrutinize this a little bit more closely. After all, we have based our physics, our chemistry, our scientific culture on the idea of conservation of energy, conservation of mass. And we know that mass may be converted into energy and vice versa. But we cannot create energy out of thin air, and we cannot create wealth out of thin air. So there must be some mistake somewhere, and let's be just careful. After all, we have a very respectable tradition, and it's incumbent on us to preserve that tradition, that we don't fall for any kind of quakery or we won't be fooled by impostors who tried to sell snake oil to us and pretend that that's the same universe. And that's actually what happened. All these people, economists, actuaries, bookkeepers, said, there's no evil if I don't see it, so I look the other way.
Yeah.
And that is the cause of our problem. Now, how do we do with time?
Well, we can go on for
Okay,
for
let's
a few
go on.
minutes.
Because I promised to say something, and you're the one listening. Now, what happened in 1909? Really what happened was this, to put it in a nutshell. There was the gold standard, and it was complete with what I call this clearing house. The gold standard has a clearing house which is better known by the name bill market. And the bill market traded real bills drawn on consumer goods in the process of production and distribution. As long as these bills are paid in 90 days, they were a substitute for gold payments. So it is the second best thing to be paid in gold coins. And ladies and gentlemen, don't listen to others who say that we can replace this system with 100% gold standard, because it's absolutely impossible physically, for the following reason. The number of exchanges which it takes to do something as simple as a wooden pencil is very high, in the hundreds. And I gave you reference. In fact, I am going to put it on my website, this particular article. The pencil. And the pencil is just a very simple thing. And what about a mechanical pencil? This will take thousands of exchanges before it can be put on the market, such a mechanism. Now, what about a computer? What about a jet engine or anything complicated, which we have lots and lots of them today? It would take hundreds of thousands of exchanges to produce something as a PC, personal computer. And what these 100%, so-called 100% gold standard people are suggesting is that every one of those hundreds or even millions of exchanges which go into the production of a single computer or a television set or anything, those millions of exchanges can be all made through gold payments. I mean, it is just not possible, even if the moon is solid gold and we have a way to pull down that gold at will from the moon, even then it's not going to be possible. So in other words, the gold standard is a marvelous thing, but it has a clearing house. And that is the bill market. You can try hard and find some substitute you want, because that's the next best thing. Something which matures into gold coins in 90 days and is backed by the actual goods on the way to the consumer who needs it, because that's why it was put into production in the first place, that there was a very high consumer demand for it, is the second best thing to gold to have. And now, thanks to the French government and the German government and all the other governments of the world ultimately caving in, the clearing house of the gold standard was destroyed by introducing legal tender coercion. Nobody thought at the time that this meant the slow death of the gold standard. But it did, because the gold standard could not survive without its clearing house. The clearing house for the gold standard is a vital organ, something like heart in the human body, or if you say this is too much, then think of the kidneys or the liver or something vital which you cannot just remove. I mean, you can pull a tooth out and you survive that. You can even operate on your you can lose fingers. I'm not going to continue multiplying examples. There are lots of things which you can survive. But if a vital organ is just removed from your system, your organism, then you are going to die. If not immediately, then very soon. And that's what happened to the gold standard. And nobody realized that this was going to happen. In fact, so much so that the victorious powers at the end of World War I announced triumphantly that we are going to have gold standard. We go back to the gold standard. And they believed that. Britain believed that. France believed that. The United States actually, on paper, never left the gold standard during World War I. It didn't have to. Gold was coming to it from all the belligerents while it was neutral and paid for ammunition. So the world accepted that propaganda that we are going back to the gold standard in 1918. But there was a little hitch. The hitch was that, and actually it was kept in secret, it just became clear over the years, that they also decided that this will be a gold standard without its clearing house. Forget about real bills, forget about financing the production and international trade of consumer goods in terms of real bills. It has to be bilateral trade. I'm not going to discuss now what the motivation for that was, other than saying that it was an effort to punish Germany over and above the on the imposition of the Versailles Peace Treaty, because they were afraid that German industry would come back and they didn't want the competition. So, in effect, if you think of it, this was reducing world trade to barter, because real bill circulation means multilateral trade, that the goods on their way to the consumer are internationally exchangeable. It doesn't depend on bilateral agreements. It's like cash, which is recognized all over the world. Now, if you have a gold standard, which is built on bilateral trade, then you have barter. So that's like going back to the Stone Age, you see. Because the invention of money, in particular gold money, was a fantastic invention which eliminated barter with its clumsiness, with its difficulty of finding matching surpluses with demand, and so on. Pick two. You need exactly what I have surplus on, and vice versa, and then we can make an exchange, which statistically has a very low probability that you will find it instantaneously. Now, it may take, of course, time, and you eventually find matching pairs, you can make the exchange, but this is very time-consuming. It could take weeks before you find, and then they make the exchange. So you cannot base a developed highly developed economy of such a primitive system as banking. So there we had, in a nutshell, the clearinghouse. The gold standard was destroyed maliciously, but that's not the point. The point is that it was destroyed. And the gold standard is not viable without this vital organ of the bill market. So it was a matter of time before it would die. And indeed, it did die in the 1930s, even without these violent acts of Roosevelt. 1933, he confiscated the gold holdings of the American citizens under false pretenses, promising to return them after the conditions settled, and never did. But let's assume this didn't happen. The gold standard would have collapsed anyhow. It was just a question of time because, as I say, its vital organ, the bill market, was taken out, eliminated, replaced by barter. So that was the fall. Now, what about the rise of the gold standard? Well, wishful thinking, but perhaps it's not. When I say that if we have this collapse, which we have been talking about in this symposium, which will be very, very painful economically, but there will be one good thing coming out of it, of this collapse, which is very damaging, very painful, but that the governments can no longer stand in the way of restoring the gold standard as it should be, complete with its clearing house, and taking care of certain things that we subsume it under the name of what kind of gold standard we call it?
Unadulterated.
Unadulterated gold standard, which assumes a couple of things. One is that you have to rule out
The fiduciary
borrowing short, lending long, and the other thing,
the fiduciary component, the promises
fiduciary component of the
without,
policy.
without.
So the money supply has two components. The gold component, monetary gold in form of coins or bullion, and the other component is the real bills outstanding, still in circulation within that 90-day period. And the fiduciary component, or including accommodation bills, anticipation bills, and all the rest of it, will be eliminated. Now, I didn't have time to speak about the euro, but perhaps during the question period I will say a few things. And Keith sent me an email, and I want him during the question period to say that in public, because it is relevant to the anticipation bills, and he says that let alone putting them into circulation, they can't even sell them. They can't, to save us anybody.
You want me to say it? So California is right now trying, or just failed.
Could you
try to sell.
elaborate on that so everybody will understand it after the break,
Okay.
during the question period? Because I think it's an extremely good point.
Yeah, after the break. Thank you, Professor.